Joining me now is Lina Khan, who served as the chair of the Federal Trade Commission under the Biden administration. Lina, welcome back to the show. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about this. You are making the point that you feel right now is a really opportune time for this country's corporations to stand up.
Well, look, I think what we are seeing right now is a very clear display of how monopolies and concentrated economic power work hand in hand with authoritarian figures. As you noted, what this is about for the president is concentrating political control, and it is so much easier to do that when you have an economy that is as concentrated as we have today. If you're a president who wants to censor your critics, media markets where 5 companies control everything make it much easier to do so than markets where you have 50 or more companies. And so this is really just putting in stark illustration how the extreme consolidation of economic power that we've seen in this country over the last few decades is now ripe for abuse by a president with such authoritarian leadings.
And this is not an abstraction. We go right back to Wednesday and Brendan Carr's comments on that podcast, which a few hours later resulted in the sidelining of Jimmy Kimmel. It was very specifically addressing the local stations that have a cap on them as to how much, how many people they can reach, and saying, you need me so that you can have more power. So maybe you should do this. It's exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly. And, this is actually a pretty old lesson. Even after World War II, the U.S. government commissioned studies to figure out what was it that allowed the rise of Nazism in Germany. And they found that industrial monopolists actually helped facilitate the rise of Hitler. As a result, Congress passed something called the 1950 Anti-Merger Act because they worried that extreme consolidation in America could also lead to the rise of anti-democratic pressures. So these are lessons that were so central to our country for decades. Unfortunately, as we adopted a legal regime that was so much more permissive of mergers, of economic consolidation, it's brought us to the situation we're in today.
So Nexstar's proposed merger with Tegna, another group that owns TV stations, would give it reach into roughly 80% of television households. The FCC's current rule is 39% is the maximum. Give me some antitrust thinking on this. From a merger antitrust perspective, what dangers arise when a handful of companies or conglomerates control so much of what we consume?
I mean, there's so many risks that come from that type of concentration: higher prices, lower wages, less choice, less innovation. But these risks are especially acute when you're talking about media markets, because this is really about controlling the flow of information, controlling the flow of news. And once you consolidate so much power and allow a handful of companies, a handful of executives to basically flip the switch on what type of news and information people are getting, it's extremely dangerous. And so it's not enough to just have a First Amendment in theory. Actually being able to exercise free speech rights means having markets where you're even able to access the free flow of information, rather than markets where you just have a handful of gatekeepers dictating what people see.
You were the chair of the Federal Trade Commission. So talk to me about the role that merger approvals and play in these kinds of things, because there is a world in which you, as a regulator, a former regulator, would have said to companies planning to merge, you need to do this or that in order to get your merger approved. How do you draw the line between the things that they should do for fair competition versus the things you want them to do for politics?
It's such an important question and such an important distinction. When you are a law enforcer reviewing a merger, you are trying to assess whether it would violate the law by undermining competition. And if you determine that it does, you either go to court, you sue them, you make your case before a judge, and the party has the right to contest that, or you enter into a settlement, you tell the company, you're right now consolidating so much power, but if you divest these stations or divest this part of your business, maybe that would make it okay. The key thing there is the entire inquiry is about market competition, is about the key economic considerations. What we're seeing with this administration is weaponization of the merger process to advance all sorts of political grievances, all sorts of culture war issues that have absolutely nothing to do with the actual competition issues at hand. And so it's extremely disturbing to see that type of lawfare and politicization.
I'm going to ask you to stand by. Lina Khan, we're going to take a quick break, continue this conversation on the other side. You're watching Velshi on MSNBC. I'm back now with Lina Khan, former FTC chair. Lina, I was talking to Jason Stanley earlier about this, and he was talking about it in media terms, but it really applies to business in general. If you have this concentration of power, you can end up with, let's say, 3, 4, 5 major media organizations in the United States, all looking like they're in competition with one another, but not serving the public interest because they're all obedient to this First Amendment that still appears to be the case. The problem here is the self-censorship, the things that companies do themselves to not want to fight with the government or the administration.
That's right. And this is a much, much broader phenomena. I mean, for months now, we've been seeing executives make pilgrimages to the White House. The result in them making huge donations to the president or his family, entering into all sorts of settlements of frivolous lawsuits. Law firms have been offering up pro bono hours when faced with, illegal executive orders. And so if you step back, overwhelmingly, we have seen that some of the most powerful corporations in this country, among the Fortune 500, among the elite of the elite, when posed with this test, when posed with this critical question, have chosen profit and self-enrichment over any type of commitment to democracy or principles of liberty. And I think this is a really important lesson. At various points, we've heard people say, well, actually, we need to really protect and pacify corporate interests because they're going to be the ones who are going to stand up to government abuse. And this moment should entirely disabuse us of that illusion.
So is the problem the regulatory framework, or is the regulatory framework fine except that it's being abused?
Well, look, the laws are on the books to allow us to police economic consolidation, economic concentration. Right now, we are seeing that be abused. But this is really coming after 40 years of a bipartisan choice to accept a philosophy that basically thought monopolies were good, that consolidation was good. In the last administration, we really started to see a pivot from that, a break from that for the first time in a generation. But of course, a lot more work needs to be done. And I think for me, the bottom line here is this. If you're somebody who cares about democracy and protecting democracy, of course, we need to think about protecting voting rights, making sure that elections are fair. But we also need to make sure that we understand extreme concentration of economic power is incompatible with democracy. And that needs to be the center of the democratic agenda, too.
This might be one of the best examples of that, right? Because we know about it when you think about cell phones, let's say, or internet service, things in which merger results in higher or lower prices for consumer. But the media example seems to be very clear to people. It's like, wait a second, they want something to happen, and it may happen because my company that I support won't stand up.
I think so. And honestly, Americans get it. I mean, when I was at the FTC, we did town halls across the country. We would go ask communities about, what does this supermarket merger mean for you? And people have seen time and time again how mergers have resulted in higher prices, in huge layoffs, in food deserts, in corporations having more and more power to push them around and bully them. And so I think people have actually a very sophisticated understanding of concentrated corporate power and the many ways that it hurts them. And they're just really looking for leaders in this moment that have the backbone to stand up to it.
When you went out to recruit comments on supermarket mergers, you had massive responses, like hard to believe numbers.
That's right. We had hundreds and hundreds of people show up, sometimes just in the middle of the day in a gym in Phoenix. We went to, Las Vegas. We went to Denver, really just parts of the country that in particular would have been affected by this Kroger-Albertsons merger and that had seen how prior supermarket mergers had left their community so much worse off.
What's your sense of whether the backlash to this that we're talking about this week, do you think that it'll have any effect? Or do these companies need to do what they need to do and try and live to fight another day?
Well, look, I think it depends. I think it depends on whether our political leaders and elected officials assume that the right answer is trying to get better corporate leaders to choose to stand up, as opposed to recognizing that this is really a structural problem and that we really need to make sure that we don't have a media ecosystem that is controlled by 5 companies, that we don't have market after market where a handful of giants get to call all the shots. And so we really need to recommit to fair competition, to more decentralization of economic power, so that we don't face this risk next time and that we're not just dependent on the whims and good judgment of a handful of executives.
Lina Khan, thank you for joining us again this morning. Lina Khan is the former chair of the Federal Trade Commission.